Hey, Scott Jordan and Mark Warner here for Jancast number 173 for Thursday, August 8th, 2024. August 8th. That means summer's almost over, Mark. What are you doing?
It's hard to imagine how fast time is flying by. Hey, we're thrilled to have Linda Lybert on with us today, too.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. So what have you been doing, Mark?
Well, interesting question you might ask. So let me go through the list. I have 4 pages of notes. No, kidding. But Ben, it's the time of year when school districts are really quite concerned about getting their schools up to a certain required benchmark of cleanliness and hygiene. So there's been a lot of training that's been going on at school districts all throughout New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York State. So that's been a lot of it. They're all trying to get certified as custodial technicians at the basic and advanced level. And Linda, that's all through ISSA's curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty happy, Scott, to tell you that, one of our own here at the Bullen Companies, Tom Cronin, came through the program to be certified at the basic and advanced level, too. That's pretty neat. So that's been a lot of what's been happening. Some of the other buzz since the last episode has had a lot to do with the standards that I've been involved with. So the IICRC's S400 cleaning standard just came out for public review. And Linda, you'll be thrilled to hear that the IICRC S410 infection control for the built environment is being released within the next 30 days for public review. And that's a great time for you to look it over because you get it for free if you're doing a review. After that, you got to buy it. But the beauty of that whole thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it takes things that we are all very familiar with, which is healthcare standards, and tries to figure out how much of that is applicable to non-healthcare environments. And try to build something that people can have a clearer picture of what their end game is. So that's been, Scott, pretty much, roughly the last 30 days have been a whirlwind about all those things. How about you?
Tom Cronin, you referred to, he is our factory rep that covers the New England territory. So any of you that are listening in that aren't Bullen customers, that's a blatant product plug, or a blatant person plug would be the better way of putting it, right? So I've been busy, but since you've been out of town and doing all this training, I had to post a different Jancast a week ago, and it's a really good one. I went through the archive, and we've been doing these shows since 2004. So I found one from 2009 that I recorded, this before video, with my dad and I driving around the ISSA show. I'm not sure where it was. I didn't look that up, but we get to chat about the history of the show, and he tells me about that his first show was in Chicago at the big thing about the ballroom and everything, and then he asked me about, well, where was your first show? And it brought me back to a story I've told many times about my dad took me out for dinner with the head of the White Mop Ringer, and the show was in San Francisco where I was going to school, and this guy from White Mop Ringer really changed my life, and that he explained, did you know, Scott, you can make money in the cleaning industry? And I was like, a light bulb went off. It was like, what? You can actually make a living? I mean, obviously, I knew my dad and his dad were in the cleaning industry for a long time, but it had never connected up. And I've actually had that discussion with many people since then about how it kind of changed my whole thinking about this industry, because I didn't realize, obviously you can make money at it. So it was a nice kind of going in the past from 2009. Nice to hear my dad and all that too.
I think you should explain as to how you and your dad were able to drive around the inside of an ISSA show. You didn't explain the role that you had at the time.
Well, I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that, but
So I'm talking about the fact that as president of the ISSA's board of directors, you had the authority to jump in a golf cart and cruise around the show.
Not everybody could just take a golf cart.
Exactly.
So that was good. And one of the reasons I started looking through the archive is I saw and noticed that a friend of ours from a long time ago, Ian Greig, who was the innovator of day cleaning, had just passed away. And I said to Mark, didn't we do something with him back in the day? So I was looking through Jancast thinking we did this recording, but Mark, you reminded me it was more than a Jancast recording, right?
We actually hosted him for a live training seminar. And all of this, the most fascinating part of it was nobody had really ever heard of the term day cleaning. And what happened on September 11th, 2001, totally changed the game. Most heavy duty cleaning was done at night.
Yep.
And the only thing that was really done during the day was day porters, double checking the supplies in the bathroom. And when security became a really big issue, everything that people did at night became necessary to do during the day so that buildings could close up, lock up, and all that kind of stuff. And it changed the game. Yep. And suddenly you can't use noisy equipment, and you can't be dragging cords around and tripping people, and you can't be kicking dust and allergens in the air and making people cough and sneeze, and it changed the game
at that time.
Yeah.
So his famous quote is, "Day cleaning is not night cleaning during the day." That kind of covers it, I think, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
So that's all the news that's been going on for the last couple of weeks. But let's get to our guest, because we want to learn more about what she's doing.
Well, the best part about day cleaning is not night cleaning during the day is one of the references had to do with disinfecting surfaces. And so without me having to say anything about it, I am completely honored and thrilled and very grateful to be able to introduce Linda Lybert. Linda, you are the director of the Healthcare Surfaces Institute. And it was brought to my attention by a mutual friend of all three of ours, Branton Serro, who is the Global Director of Education for the ISSA. And he had reached out to us talking about how he was so thrilled that you had joined the family of the ISSA as a division. And I am thrilled to hear it. And he said, wait till you hear Linda talk about surfaces and how they're being done right and how they're being done wrong. And, there's things in life you see, you can't unsee, and things you hear, you can't unhear. And she's going to talk about some things that go beyond Dr. Charles Gerba. And you're going to have a rethinking about the rest of your life. So, Linda, I am just so thrilled to be the person honored to introduce you to everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And the Institute is so thrilled to now be a division of ISSA. That merger really brought together two important areas of expertise to really have an impact on not only healthcare. You mentioned it a little while ago. It's not just healthcare. The main reason why we're focused there is because of immune compromised people, but in any area. You talk about education. The same plays out in all of those areas as well. So it's important.
Well, I really enjoyed, just before we started the recording, we had a conversation about another mutual friend, Dr. Charles Gerba, right? Yep. So, talk about things you hear that you can't unhear. He was talking about like toilet plumes, that contaminate the air, and sink splash plumes, and dirty carpet stomp plumes, and all that kind of stuff. And that then later got validated in a Jancast we did with a guy by the name of Dinesh Wadhwani, who is an expert on indoor air quality, So a lot of the things that you and I think about have now become kind of mainstream, and everybody's starting to think about it. Like, what is it we really need to be concerned about? And just before we got started, we were joking about Dr. Gerba and the toilet plume, but you talked a little bit about some of the things that people don't know that they don't know. And that is, even things like tile walls have two separate cleaning procedures required in order to make sure they're not loaded with infectious materials. And I think that's kind of a theme of what Healthcare Surfaces Institute is about, is that there's things people don't know that they don't know. Can you share a little of that with us?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're focused on is truly infection prevention, and cleaning and disinfection decisions happen at design, and they're not thought about. Last year, I was fortunate enough to give 37 different presentations to architect and design firms of healthcare. And one of the questions I asked at the very beginning of my presentation was, How many of you read care and maintenance and instruction for use guidelines before you specify a product into healthcare? Guess how many hands went up?
We used to say squatta.
Yeah, exactly. And it really brought home the fact that people do not think about how are we going to clean and disinfect these areas. And then you talked about the public restrooms, the patient bathrooms. We use materials such as ceramic tile and grout and brushed stainless steel and microbes. We don't think about the microbes because we can't see them, but oh man. They actually are able to attach to the rough materials. And so as soon as they attach, they begin to form biofilm, which puts a protective coating around them, which makes it even more difficult for our EVS professionals to go in and clean and disinfect effectively. So as I mentioned, every January, the research comes out again and it says, well, we're not getting these places clean. Well, it's because you're using materials that really are difficult, if not impossible, to clean.
And you bring up a very sophisticated comment there that might be worth an explanation, that biofilms are actually part of the enemy. People often hear us talk about bacteria, viruses, even spores, but the term biofilms doesn't necessarily come up all that often. And it's kind of worth people knowing that that's kind of it creates an environment that protects bacteria that's deadly or viral material from going airborne. And it's one of the enemies that we have to attack. Can you touch on that?
I can. So there's a lot of research going on with biofilm. Originally, it was thought that it only forms in moist, wet areas. And that's not true. They're finding that it actually forms on dry surfaces as well. And what it is the microbe goes to a surface material and it has to attach to the material first. And then this matrix of cellular microbes, let's just put it that way. I'm not a scientist. I know enough to be dangerous. It actually forms. And you can see it under a microscope where it looks like there's a netting. So you have the small microbe that attaches to a surface. And then it begins to form colonies and it actually will proliferate. It'll continue to grow on the surface until it matures, and then it'll release into the air. And there's a variety of ways to get it to release. So really our goal is to use surfaces that prevent the attachment of microbes. So does that mean we use antimicrobial surfaces? No. Because the biggest issue we have is antimicrobial resistance. And if you overuse an antibiotic or an antimicrobial material, eventually those microbes will build a resistance. But you don't throw the baby out with the bath. Antimicrobial surfaces used strategically in a healthcare environment or any environment can help reduce the amount of pathogens on a surface in between cleaning and disinfection. And so I guess my point is you truly have to think about the strategy of the use of surface materials in any kind of environment and how can they support effective cleaning and disinfection.
Yeah, so I would imagine you're familiar with some of the protocol that's being established for residual disinfectant claims. Does that give us any hope for all the facilities that can't be retrofitted? Then maybe that we can bring them into, the ultimate goal would be to build buildings that don't have these surfaces, but that's going to take a long time. So how do you feel about the supposed residual disinfectants that aren't there yet, but at least they established the protocol? Does that give us any hope?
Well, everything gives us hope, right? It's around the fact of how is it being used? How is it strategically being placed? I mean, our environmental services professionals do a great job of cleaning if they're supported with the proper materials, and residual disinfectants is one of those. So when we think about areas that are not cleaned as frequently, that have the opportunity for biofilm to expand and grow, those are areas where that type of product could be very, very beneficial. Areas that are cleaned quickly. So let's talk about an emergency department, for instance. Those rooms get turned over very quickly between patients. A residual disinfectant product may or may not really work, because how long does it last before it's cleaned off, some of those types of things. And that goes back to testing. We need to make sure we're testing these products and we're getting a clear understanding how healthcare has to clean and disinfect these areas and see how long those products last so that we know when they're no longer working. And the other thing about this is that we need to educate the frontline workers so they understand that just because that has a product there does not mean it's self-cleaning. It's not. You still have to clean it.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for all of this, but again, it goes back to we need to educate, we need to understand and think strategically, and again, they'll be beneficial.
I love the point that you made there. One of the things I had mentioned earlier is that I was part of the S410 infection control standard. And what they are really keying on more than anything is the verification and validation that the surface has effectively been disinfected. And so Scott and I have often joked about the fact that it's not just having some miracle chemical, you have to know how to use it. Yep. And even otherwise, you would never be considered to be successful. And the reverse is also true. If you have all the knowledge in the world, but you don't have the right chemical, you're still not going to be successful. So there's this marriage between having the right tools and equipment and chemistry, along with having the knowledge of how to use it. Yeah. And then the verification and validation years ago was fluorescent markers and black lights and all that kind of stuff. And it's moved into ATP meters to determine whether there's any biologicals left on the surface. And then from that, the look into the future is some of the hyperspectral imaging cameras that actually will cause surfaces to glow in a picture to show where it might have been missed. And that's the future, I think, is, we've got surfaces that help reduce the load, but it doesn't take the place of having the right stuff and the right training to do it right. So
absolutely.
Anyway, you got me excited. Sorry.
Well, and you bring up a really interesting point. When the Institute first formed, one of the things we did was a very comprehensive literature review. And currently, there are no regulatory requirements that exist that make or encourage even manufacturers to test their surface materials for cleaning and disinfection, and what's most important, surface disinfection compatibility. And we could go in a whole nother direction with this, with your instructions for use. Okay. But one of the things that the Institute discovered was that there was no consistency in the testing. So even though there's not a regulatory requirement to test for surface cleanability and compatibility, we discovered that manufacturers were testing, although they were not testing in a way that mimicked what was happening within the facility. And then the other thing we found is there was inconsistency in test methods, and they weren't using the same microbes. So the data they were getting from the testing and validation was skewed. It was just sort of the Wild West out there. And so the Institute has taken on a project which is called Surface Testing, Surface Standards and Compatibility. And we are actually writing test methods for a certification program that we're going to offer in the future. We've patented, the patent is pending, our first test method, which is for plastics. And you test a variety of different disinfectants. And when does that surface become damaged to the point that you can't clean it any longer? And so we're doing that. And then the test method that we're working on right now is assemblies, because on, for instance, a medical device, you have 5 or 6 different surface materials on one product. they can't all be cleaned the same way.
Yeah.
So how do we know when the bioburden is heavy enough that you aren't going to be able to clean it effectively and you have patient risk? So the Institute has a task force that's working on that project right now as well. And then part of that program will also include instructions for use, because those are also all over the board. There's no guidance around how manufacturers should even write these. And within the healthcare facility, they struggle to actually clean following those IFUs. And so we are, that's one of the big projects for the Institute.
Wow.
What's interesting that what you bring up is the fact that, you know, you can disinfect anything if you use napalm and a flamethrower. But the bigger question is, how do we go about cleaning and disinfecting without damaging the surface, right? So the definition of clean is making it free of unwanted material without causing damage, right? And you bring up the point, we've all seen people use pumice sticks to go after water stain marks in the porcelain of a toilet bowl, but they're not realizing that it destroys the glazing and it actually becomes a big problem. And so you make that point at a very higher level that some of the cleaners that we work with, we may not want to work with disinfectants that are highly corrosive if we're working with really sensitive equipment and so on. So I love that comment that you had made.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And the other thing is understanding that the goal of the healthcare facility professional is to kill the pathogen. And so, and make sure that, you know, it's not spreading throughout the healthcare facility. So in a lot of cases, they will use a disinfectant. For instance, bleach on a mattress damages the mattress, but at the same time, that's the disinfectant that kills C. difficile. Right. And so there's this balance that needs to start to happen of understanding of what are we trying to kill and what can we use effectively to do that with the least amount of risk.
We saw a lot of that when we were doing frontline battle with COVID, where there was a real push to try to get into shorter and shorter kill time requirements. Mm-hmm. And people didn't really realize that there's a trade-off, that some of the ones that had a little bit longer kill dwell time were that way because they were less corrosive on surfaces. You know, you want it to really kill immediately, just hit it with a hand grenade, you know, but the idea was that there's this trade-off. And so you have to be really smart about deciding, you know, whether it's worth a trade-off to shorten your kill time if it means you're using something more corrosive and potentially damaging the surfaces, like you said. I mean, I've been involved with healthcare facilities that have used bleach in the OR and the exam rooms, and the strong solution of bleach will literally corrode stainless steel. It'll eat it.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a question for you, Linda. I imagine that you have a whole team of people that support you within the Healthcare Surfaces Institute. Did you want to do a shout out to anyone?
Sure. So we have, when the Institute was founded, we founded it with a board of directors of 15 high-level healthcare professionals. And our goal is to bring in a diverse area of expertise. So infection preventionists, environmental services professional, patient safety professionals, doctors, scientists, academia professionals. And that's what we did. We ended up having a meeting where we asked 3 simple questions, brought 30 professionals in, including nurses, etc. And the 3 questions we asked is, what is the surfaces issue? What are your hurdles to success addressing that issue? And where do we begin? And they had 10-minute lightning talks, and every single person answered those questions completely different. There were a lot of aha moments in that room, and that's how the Institute was founded. And so our goal is to bring people out of their silos of expertise and bring them together to find sustainable solutions, because every single one of those professionals had a clear understanding of one of the aspects of the problem. And when we brought them all together and they were communicating all of this information, we had some pretty incredible sustainable solutions that came out of just that first meeting. And so we broke the team apart So we have our scientists that are one, and then we had our board of directors. And now that we've merged with HSI, we call them our advisory council. They are all extremely active. And then we also work in task force. So based on different areas or different projects, we have a task force that's working on them. And again, a collaborative group of experts and thought leaders is really having an impact in this area.
All right, good. Well, thanks very much for taking the time. Do you have anything coming up at the, I know it's a ways off, the ISSA show? Are you doing a summit or anything there, a seminar?
Yeah, we're doing
a plug.
Yeah, every single year we have, until COVID, we had a summit. And now that we've merged with ISSA, we are bringing our summit back. It will be on the front end of the ISSA show. Good. So the 18th and 19th. And it is unlike any other event probably that you've attended, because it is a very open, interactive discussion as we develop our task force for the year. And so, yes, we're really excited about it.
Great. Well, we'll be there as exhibitors, so we'll make a point of getting over and seeing it.
Awesome. It'll be great.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for taking the time. Very interesting. I'm sure our audience has found it interesting, and we'll put some info in the show notes where people can get in touch with you and if they have any further questions. But Mark, anything before we close out?
No, just want to thank you very much, Linda. Yeah. Really love this conversation we've had and hope to work with you in the future.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.